Let's talk about whether the door is shut on getting any, honesty and accuracy about how the COVID pandemic started. It was a year since the COVID pandemic started that we finally saw a WHO, World Health Organization, scientists allowed into China to actually do some sort of on-the-ground investigations in Wuhan about the origins of the COVID vaccine. And a leaked document yesterday suggested that from the World Health Organization experts investigating the origins, that it was extremely unlikely that it was one of the Wuhan labs that were dealing with viruses that was responsible, and it was far more likely to be bats being the likely animal reservoir. But how likely and how trustworthy is this? Let's talk to Lord Ridley, who's a Conservative peer and author of How Innovation Works, and has been looking into this. Good morning to you, Lord Ridley.
Good morning, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Lovely to talk to you. We saw, didn't we, a few months ago, those experts going into China, and they spent weeks investigating the origins. But we know that they were given very limited access and were supervised at all times by Chinese scientists and Chinese authorities. And they've come to conclusions which I'm sure the Chinese authorities will be quite happy with. Should we read anything into that?
Yes, I'm afraid it's a pure whitewash. The investigation took many months to negotiate access at all. The members of the investigation were agreed by the Chinese authorities. They relied on Chinese scientists' work. They didn't do any work themselves. They were heavily chaperoned. They didn't ask very searching questions while they were there. So we were expecting a whitewash, and a whitewash is what we've got. We've got a report that in 300 pages dismisses in one paragraph as very unlikely the idea that the virus leaked out of a laboratory, but then spends 20 or 30 pages going into great detail about how 45,000 animals of poultry and wildlife and things have been tested in China, all found negative, yet nonetheless concludes that it's very likely that one of them carried the virus to Wuhan. So, it's on a scale of the World Health Organization report, producing a report saying that, no, it was not a container ship that blocked the Suez Canal. That's a myth got to you by outside vile media. I'm afraid it's that bad.
It's that level of dishonesty. And we've seen so many reports, undercover reports, information basically having to be smuggled out of China from scientists who were working in these labs. Why are you so convinced, and why are so many others so convinced? And we're told that Donald Trump has seen the evidence from his own investigators in the United States when he was president about why the Wuhan lab, one of the number, it turns out, of Wuhan labs may well have been responsible. What's the evidence that you believe the World Health Organization should have been looking at?
Well, it's not just the Trump administration. Antony Blinken, the current Secretary of State, has said that this report is methodologically questionable and that it's not acceptable that it was effectively written by the Chinese government. Now, the point is that we know the closest relative of the virus that caused the pandemic that has been found, and this is conceded in the report, the closest relative was in a bat in southern Yunnan province, 1,000 miles from Wuhan, and that sample was taken from that bat and taken to Wuhan by scientists to a laboratory. That's the only known link between a wild virus closely related to the virus causing the pandemic and the city of Wuhan. That is to say, an expedition in 2013 by scientists that collected viruses. They collected 8 others 2 years later. They refused to release the genomes of those so far. When they published the first genome, they disguised the fact that this virus had been collected from a bat in a mine shaft where 6 people had got sick, 3 of whom died. Still, even in this report, the name and location of that mine shaft is not shown. I mean, we know it thanks to some diligent sleuths on the internet who've managed to dig up some obscure theses and find out. So I'm not saying it definitely came via the scientists to the laboratory, but it's a very strong hypothesis, and it needs to be properly investigated, not dismissed in one paragraph by the World Health Organization. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, no, it is extraordinary, again, that most of the evidence has come out not from the World Health Organization investigation, but, as you say, sleuths on the internet, investigative journalists as well. But just finally, I just want to ask, what does it matter how it actually emerged? We know the Chinese authorities engage in cover-ups. They don't believe in freedom of speech, and well, apparently neither do we in this country anymore, or any of that. So does it actually matter that it came from either, I don't know, a wet market or from the labs? Well, does that change anything?
Oh, it changes a lot. It's very important that we find out, because if this came via the wildlife trade to wet markets, then we know that we need to focus on clamping down on that trade in order to prevent the next pandemic.
But we knew that already, did we not, from the last pandemic that came out of the wet markets?
Well, that's true. The SARS epidemic did. But four times, SARS also leaked from laboratories in 2004. So now, if this one turns out to have leaked from a laboratory, then we need to understand the kind of research that's going on highly dangerous viruses all around the world. There was a huge debate about this 5 years ago in the United States about so-called gain-of-function experiments, saying, are these too risky? The research done in Wuhan, which has the biggest collection of bat coronaviruses in the world, by the way, Wuhan city does, the research done was in an attempt to understand how dangerous these viruses were in order to prevent the next pandemic. If instead of doing that, it caused the pandemic, we need to know that.